first thing we're going to do while the vehicle is on the ground is we're going to crack these lug nuts loose. And we're not going to take them out or loosen them too much. We're just going to make sure that they're all loose in a bowl. The jack point at the front of a 2015 Ford Explorer, if you go to the driver's side mirror straight down, you'll notice that in this rim here there's a little upward lip, right? And that's the jack point. So we're just going to get a jack in there. I like to use a hockey puck just to save the metal from additional metal on metal. So we'll jack it up just enough to get the wheel off the ground. After I jack it up and take the wheel off, I like to put an additional support, an additional jack stand underneath it, just so I'm not relying on one jack. Here are the caliper bolts. Okay, they're the outermost bolts around this caliper bracket, and they take a 17mm socket, and sometimes they're pretty seized up, so you can do one of two things. You can put some PB Blaster or other penetrating lubricant there, or in this case we're just going to use some good old American leverage. Let's crack this open. Alright, so we got our caliper bolts out over there, those two long bolts. Now we're going to work the caliper away from the caliper bracket, like so. And there's a little weight on this caliper, so you don't want this hanging by the brake line. So we're going to strap it up like so to relieve the pressure on the brake line. Alright, so here are our pads, and they are attached to the rotor, so we're just going to pry these off like so. And as you can see, they're pretty worn, so we're going to go ahead and replace them. Pry off one, pry off the other, and because the rotor's a little worn as well, we're going to go ahead and take out, replace the rotor as well. And so the bolts on the rotor are actually going to be here and here, and those are 18mm. Sorry, the bolts on the caliper bracket, are going to be 18mm bolts. Just to show you where they are, here's the rotor, there's the caliper bracket. We go behind, and that's the angle for the bottom bolt. Again, 18mm, and this is the angle for the upper bolt right there. Those two. And then off comes your caliper bracket, giving us full access to the rotor. Now there is a screw in here that sometimes it's in there, sometimes it's not. I typically don't put it in there because it's only to hold the rotor in place, but doesn't have really much of a function, and it's kind of a pain to get out. But this is a Torx bit, and it's a T40 Torx bit, so we're going to go ahead and get that screw out. Our T40 Torx screw there is being a little ornery, so what we're going to do is to get a little bit more leverage rather than the hand screwdriver set, we're going to put this into a 1/4 inch socket like so, and that gives us enough leverage to crack it open like that. And this is actually not my vehicle, so I'm going to go ahead and replace this when all is said and done, but if it was mine, I wouldn't even replace it. Typically these rotors are stuck on there pretty good because people don't use the brake lubricant when they're putting rotors and pads back on. So we're going to have to give this a couple good whacks. Always wear safety glasses because rust and particles will fly out at you. So with a trusty mallet, just hit it a few times. We got our rotor off. As you can see by all the notches here, all the wax, unfortunately traditional mallet, which is usually sufficient, wasn't enough. This rotor is pretty worn, it's been stuck on there, so in that case it's time to break out my boomstick, and that should get it off. Now what we're going to do, as you can see how sticky it was with all the rust, we're just going to take a wire brush, a cheap old wire brush will do, and just clean off some of the rust on this area here. Now that we've scraped off a lot of the obvious rust parts, we're going to spray this down to one more clean with brake cleaner. Don't breathe this stuff in, it's pretty toxic. Let it soak for a while. Before we put our new rotor on, we're going to do two things. One is we're going to apply some brake caliper lube to the backing plate here so that we next time don't have the same arduous process of having to get the rotor off. The second thing is on the new rotor, we're going to spray some brake cleaner also, because the rotors are typically shipped with a film to prevent rust. Well, that film can also degrade stopping power, so we actually want to get rid of that film. So we spray a little bit of that brake cleaner on it and wipe it down, and that way we get rid of that protective rust-proof film. And we do that on both sides because obviously the brake pad is grabbing on both sides. Here's our new rotor. Just when you line it up here, make sure this set hole lines up with the same one on the wheel hub, which should be right there. And then we'll, like I said, I typically don't like to replace this if it's my vehicle, but this is not my vehicle. So I'm going to replace the set screw here, but I'm definitely not going to over tighten it. I'm just going to kind of get it snug. The new brake pad set gave us replacement clips here, so we're going to take advantage of that and take out these old clips from the caliper bracket, replace them with the new ones. Before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and use my wire brush just to clean out the area a little bit before I put the new clips in. Got our caliper bracket back on, and these are the bolts in the back as we showed you the first time. Just going to tighten those back up, and then it will be time to put our new pads in. We're going to put on our new pads, and as you can see, the difference between the old pad and the new pad is pretty apparent in the thickness. Make sure, and everybody's done this, that the pad side is touching the rotor. So we're going to slide it in here and in here into those clips, and there we go. And the same thing for the other side, and then we will work on our caliper. Now, if we try and put the existing caliper back on the pads as is, it's not going to fit because the pistons have pushed out to accommodate the wear in the old brake pads. So we have to push these pistons back to allow room for the caliper to slide over the new pads. Well, first thing we're going to do in that case is we have to relieve the pressure in the brake line. So what we did was we went up here to the brake fluid reservoir and we took the cap off so that when we start pushing these pistons back in, the pressure and the air will be relieved out of there. Otherwise, sometimes the pistons will want to work their way back. And then we'll use this handy tool set, and we'll select a disc that most closely matches what we have here. And the way it works is it comes like so. Here's the disc. So we put the disc at the end, we slide this through here, we fit this in here, and then we just start turning like so till we make contact, and then we'll push this caliper back. So as we twist, you see the piston pushing back into the housing of the caliper, and we do that for both sides. Be careful that this boot doesn't come off, because if it does, you're going to start leaking brake fluid, and that's going to be a mess. So we got our one piston in. I'm just going to slide over to the next one. So now we can slide our caliper with the pistons pushed back over our new pads. Go ahead and push these rubber boots in so that they can accept the caliper pins. Working the caliper pin on both sides. And we are good to go. Last step obviously is to tighten the lug nuts on the wheel as tight as they'll go. Well, don't try to break it off obviously, while on the jack. And then we're going to set it down with the pressure on the wheel and tighten it one more time. And just to give you an idea on pricing, the dealership, which has a lift and air tools, which would make this job very easy, this took us about maybe 30 minutes per side. So we're doing two sides, about an hour's worth of work. You know, now we know what we're doing. And the dealership would charge all-inclusive, just for the front two that we're doing, $600. And what was the price in parts?
$220.
$220 in parts. So basically, for about an hour or so's worth of work, you've saved yourself, you know, $380. Seems worth it to me. We're going to take our jack out. Now all the weight is on the wheel, and we're going to do one last tightening of the lug nuts, because we just don't want a wheel to accidentally fly off. And that's it. Pretty simple.